Hi, everyone, and welcome back to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. I'm Danielle Underwood, your host. Recently, a new federal law, part of the One Big Beautiful Bill reconciliation package, included a one-year freeze on Medicaid payments to abortion franchises, like Planned Parenthood. It was the first new federal action in years to directly protect taxpayers from being forced to fund big abortion. With Medicaid as its biggest funding stream, the change caused immediate pressure on the abortion franchise's business model and is forcing fresh conversations about the portrayal of abortion facilities as quote-unquote healthcare centers. Today, I'm in the studio with Denise Burke, Senior Counsel with Alliance Defunding Freedom, to discuss these and other ongoing efforts to defund Planned Parenthood. Denise focuses her legal work on protecting human life at all stages and defending the conscience rights of healthcare professionals. Before joining ADF, she served as Vice President of Legal Affairs for Americans United for Life and served as a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Air Force as an instructor at the U.S. Air Force JAG School. Welcome, Denise, and thank you for joining us here in the podcast studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about Alliance for Defending Freedom?
Alliance Defending Freedom is an organization dedicated to protecting everyone's God-given right to live and speak the truth. And that involves a variety of issues that we work on that affect Kansans every day. Protection of life, protection of the family, protection of religious freedom, protection of speech. So many issues that are at the heart of the debates that we're having in this country right now are issues that we work on. We work on cases and legislation and policy discussions, not only here in the United States, but across the world.
So much good work, so much work that needs to be done. And you all have been important partners with us over many years now. We always value your advice and your input and your ideas on strategy and just partnering with you in all the different ways that we kind of align our purposes and our missions.
Well, that's why the first name in our name is Alliance, because none of us are doing this work alone. We're certainly doing it with God's grace, but we're also doing it with wonderful allies like Kansans for Life and different pro-life, pro-family groups across the country and across the world.
That's wonderful. So tell us a little bit more about your personal background. You've been at ADF for how long now?
I just celebrated my 8th anniversary at Alliance Defending Freedom as Senior Counsel in our Center for Public Policy, which is a nice way of saying that I do a lot of legislative work with legislators and policy allies across the country. Prior to that, I was Vice President of Legal Affairs with Americans United for Life. So I have been doing pro-life legal work for 25 years now. And I've seen a lot of changes. I've seen a lot of wonderful victories. But I'm deeply honored to have had the opportunity to be one of many that was involved in the Dobbs case that brought down Roe versus Wade 3 years ago.
I'm sure that's an exciting story in and of itself. I wish we could have more time to cover that today, but we do have a lot to talk about. But a lot of history there. You're certainly a veteran of the pro-life movement. And then before you began that kind of work, you also had an interesting background. As I was preparing for this, looking at your U.S. Air Force, the time in the U.S. Air Force, and you actually teaching other lawyers at the JAG School. Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Happy to. When I went to law school, I knew that I wanted to serve something bigger than myself. I was not geared to go and work at a big law firm and make a lot of money or make sure that other people made a lot of money. There were important issues that needed to be dealt with. And one of the greatest honors of my life was the opportunity to serve my country as my father did for 20 years in the United States Air Force. I started out as a military prosecutor, which taught me a lot about presenting cases and looking at evidence, and eventually ended my active duty career teaching at the JAG School and teaching both our senior lawyers and our brand new lawyers, which was my favorite part, is teaching the new people that were coming into the military to dedicate themselves to the mission that we had to protect and serve our nation. And I ended my active duty career and actually spent 7 years in the reserves, which included returning to active duty in the wake of the attacks of 9/11.
So much history there, too. And I think a lot of us have heard of JAG, but we may not know. What is that? What does that stand for?
The acronym stands for Judge Advocate General. And that's basically the acronym for the legal advisors to the commanders of the Air Force. We do a variety of things. The main reason that we have lawyers in uniform is to administer military justice. But we also deal with, we're like having a little kind of law firm that serves the commanders of different bases or different commands on environmental issues, contracting issues, personnel issues. Basically, almost anything you could come up with that a lawyer might do, there's a JAG lawyer doing the same thing in the military.
So it sounds like a wonderful training ground for arguing important cases.
It was a wonderful opportunity coming out of law school because I got handed my first case less than a month after I'd actually gone on active duty. And I don't think you can find many people at a law firm that can say the same.
Well, that is all so very interesting. I love hearing about your background. It's just you have a lot of color in your experience, and I think that makes you, it gives you a lot of wisdom as you're approaching some of these different issues. So let's start our conversation today. Can you begin by explaining this new federal funding restriction of Medicaid dollars to Planned Parenthood and other facilities that are offering abortions on their sites? Why does this matter?
The Big Beautiful Bill contains a restriction on funding providers of abortion for 1 year. So there were already restrictions in federal law to fund the actual abortion procedure. But this goes a step further, and it says if you are a provider of abortion, you are not going to receive state or federal Medicaid dollars. And that is a huge development, even though it was only for 1 year. We've never been able to get something like this in place before. And we know that, at least with regard to Planned Parenthood, Medicaid comprises more than 30% of their annual revenue. So that's a significant blow to the financial bottom line of Planned Parenthood and their ability to continue to offer abortion services in communities across the country.
Wow. So can you translate 30% of their budget into real dollars for us?
I've heard estimates anywhere from over $500 million taxpayer dollars are going to Planned Parenthood every year. And it's important to remember that's just not just Medicaid, that is other funding streams. Title X family planning money, a variety of state funding streams. So taxpayer dollars are going to Planned Parenthood in huge amounts. And we know that if those dollars stop flowing, we're going to see fewer abortions and we're going to see fewer clinics offering those services. Just this week, up in Wisconsin, Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin said that they would no longer be offering abortion services because they can't afford to lose these Medicaid dollars.
Very interesting. So the facilities that are affected by this, the specific kind of the common thread between all of them is whether or not they offer abortions on site. Is that correct?
Whether they or they're affiliated with someone who offers abortion services, whether it's surgical abortion or chemical abortion.
Okay, so all types of abortions. Mm-hmm. And we know that's important because of the high percentage of abortions that are currently done via chemical or pill abortion, as most people would know and think of it. So I think, one question that is coming to my mind right now, so many times when we talk about tax dollars, how taxpayers should be protected from being forced to pay for abortions. People will very commonly think of the Hyde Amendment. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could explain how this is different than the protections offered by the Hyde Amendment.
Okay. As I'm sure many of your listeners know, the Hyde Amendment protects for paying for the actual abortion procedure, except in very limited circumstances of rape, incest, or when it's necessary to protect the life of the mother. This federal funding limitation, again, that's for 1 year, goes even further than that. And it says we will not give taxpayer dollars, to anyone who actually provides the service. So you can't, contracts that say we're going to pay X number of dollars to Planned Parenthood under our state Medicaid program, they're not going to be able to pay those dollars for any type of service. unless and until that provider says we're no longer providing abortion services.
Okay. And that is important because we know that some of these abortion facilities, they'll do a very small percentage of their services might be for other health services. So it could be for pap smears or other types of services. But really, their primary service that they're offering is the abortion itself. And so they're using that cover of supposedly being this healthcare provider. But in actuality, I mean, it's a profit-making center offering abortions.
And with regard to Planned Parenthood, the latest data shows, I believe, that when they're giving services to pregnant women, 97% of the time they're talking about abortion services.
And that number is staggering.
It is.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. So obviously, these Medicaid reimbursements are so significant to their overall budget. We know that, as this was all playing out in the news, we know that most corporate media is so heavily biased towards pro-abortion reporting. And I'm just wondering what kind of misinformation you saw during that time and even now that, as they were covering these developments, what did we hear that was truly misreporting?
The biggest lie, there's no other way to put it, that we hear is that if we're not providing Medicaid services and Medicaid dollars to and through Planned Parenthood, women are going to lose access to health care. That obviously would concern anyone of goodwill. You want to make sure that women in our communities are getting good quality health care. But I actually looked at a map today, and just here in the state of Kansas, there are 159 community health centers providing care to women versus 4 Planned Parenthood centers. That's an even bigger discrepancy than the nationwide. It's about 15-1 nationwide. But for us here in Kansas, the gap is even larger. And what's really telling is if you look at a map where all these community health centers are, they're across the state of Kansas, where Planned Parenthood is concentrated here in the Kansas City area and in Wichita. So by not providing Medicaid dollars to someone like Planned Parenthood and providing it to these community health centers who provide full, comprehensive care to women where they live all over the state of Kansas, women are going to have access to better quality health care and easier access to that care.
That's a great point. So when we say comprehensive, let's tease that out some more and see, what do we mean when we say comprehensive health care for women that's being offered at these community health centers?
Well, women at community health centers are going to be able not only to take care of, say, their family planning concerns, their pregnancy concerns, but any other health concerns that they have. And I think we all agree and understand that you're going to get better quality health care when you can get it together under one roof with one provider who's coordinating it and knows your history, understands the medical issues involved. That's not what you get at Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood, as we've talked about already, is focused in on abortion and maybe a small amount of so-called family planning or contraceptive care. They are not providing women with referrals for diabetes or making sure that their high blood pressure stays in check. Those are the types of things that are going to occur at these community health centers. So women will be healthier and their babies will be healthier.
We also want to talk about the pregnancy resource centers out there, too. Some of them are just offering social services, but many of them are also offering medical services. And we have pro-life medical providers, doctors who work on site at some of those pregnancy centers to offer many different types of health support for women. So I think that's another wonderful safety net for so many women that often gets forgotten in that media conversation that's happening.
And these pregnancy centers are going to be tied into the medical establishment within their communities. So if the woman has a medical issue that the pregnancy center can't handle, they know where to send her, and they're going to send her there because they're, again, not focused in on abortion, but providing the woman and her baby with the best health care possible. Great
point. And then even on top of that, I think we could also mention how they have so many other wraparound services for those women and families who come in for their for services at those pregnancy resource centers that really extend, again, out into the community and different types of mentoring and other types of support to if a woman needs access to, for example, food stamps or some other type of social support that they would be able to help connect her with those right paths to get her the kind of help she needs, outside of just even the direct support that's offered by those pregnancy centers from the many pro-life people who help support the work, the very important work of those pregnancy centers.
Pregnancy centers are doing an inestimable amount of good for women in our communities. And that's why one of our key objectives at ADF is to protect their ability to continue to do so. Because I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to learn that in just the last 3 years, since Roe was overturned, the abortion industry has stepped up their attacks on pregnancy centers, trying to shut them down and make sure that they don't have the competition from pregnancy centers.
Since you brought that up, we actually have just recently posted another episode with Myrna Maloney Flynn from the state of Massachusetts, who was right in the middle of that battle. That they were the good names of pregnancy centers in their state were being smeared, again, using tax dollars with these ad campaigns that were so misleading, calling them fake clinics and other things, warning women that they should not go to those places and putting warnings on their addresses that were appearing online, all kinds of things. So yes, lots of attacks against those pregnancy centers in other states. And
about half the country, actually.
Half the country.
Yes.
Wow. That's very interesting. We definitely want to protect the good work of these centers. So many wonderful pro-life people who work in those different centers and provide so much help to women. All right. So then, as Planned Parenthood has been framing these cuts, as you're saying, as being harmful to women's health, but the truth is that women do have access to that comprehensive health care through those community centers and through those pro-life clinics. Is this a moment for pro-life pregnancy centers to expand their reach and maybe consider how they could open those offerings up, maybe expand their medical services or counseling, other tangible supports? Should this be something that they're considering? Is this a moment of opportunity for pregnancy centers?
This is definitely a moment of opportunity for pregnancy centers. It's kind of an interesting convergence of factors. You've got the defunding of Planned Parenthood, which gives them an opening to provide even more care to more women in their communities. And then you've got the simultaneous attacks that we've talked about that are going on against them, which gives them a chance to talk in the public and to go into the legislatures and show people the wonderful work that they are doing at no cost to taxpayers. There are some states, as you know, that provide budgetary allocations to the work of pregnancy centers. Those should increase. But we have to keep in mind that the majority of what pregnancy centers are doing are with donations, donated money, donated time. Much of what they do is being done free of cost, and we're seeing the benefits in our communities. So this is a great opportunity for our pregnancy centers to step up and talk more about what they do, to dispel the lies that too many people hear about pregnancy centers, the fake clinics that you mentioned, and to really have more opportunity to serve the women.
I'm really glad you brought up both of those points, because here in Kansas, Kansans for Life and our allies in the State House, we worked so hard to put that funding in place, that money that is earmarked and designated for direct support to women, both through the Pregnancy Compassion Awareness Fund that is now providing $3 million per year that's available to these pregnancy resource centers for that direct work. And they, will go in and they track all of that, what services are being offered to women, and so that it's all very transparent, that information is available. And then also, we wanted to make sure that donors to pregnancy centers were incentivized to provide more direct support to those wonderful organizations. And so we now have that 70% tax credit that has been an incredible benefit. Everything I've heard from different directors of pregnancy centers I've spoken with says that was a game changer for them, that it really helped them to amplify their efforts because of that, those two new funding streams that have enabled them to do so much more work for any woman who wants it. And again, like you said, for free of charge, completely free of charge.
And Kansas really has been a model for other states to follow on both of those points. And we're certainly hoping going into the state legislative sessions in 2026 that we're going to be able to encourage more states to do the same. Because as you point out, we get more bang for our buck in the money that we provide to pregnancy centers than we would ever get providing or funding an organization like Planned Parenthood.
Absolutely. and with so many types of things that Planned Parenthood would never and will never provide. Yes. So how can individual states then, okay, so we're talking about this at the federal level, and you mentioned how important it is that those Medicaid funds were not directed to those abortion providers. But are there ways that states can now kind of pick up the baton and keep running with this to just extend that effort and make this, are there other ways that we could intervene and again, remove additional funding from those abortion facilities?
With what was in the big, beautiful bill, it's important to remember that's only a 1-year moratorium on funding. They'll have to go back and try and extend it. But we at the state level, whether it's here in Kansas or elsewhere, can do two things. We can go through an executive process where an executive order would be issued, and we've seen that done in other states, like Oklahoma recently, where the governor said, sorry, if you provide abortions or if you provide gender-affirming care, you're not going to be part of our Medicaid program. But we can also have a much more permanent solution, which is for the legislature to pass legislation saying exactly that the state officials will not enter into contracts of any kind, whether it's Medicaid or others, with providers of abortion or gender-affirming care. And one thing it's important to remember about Planned Parenthood, not only are they a large abortion provider, but they are the nation's second largest provider of so-called gender-affirming drugs and care, oftentimes to minors.
Right, and let's unpack gender-affirming.
Yes. I use that term very loosely, but it has to do with dangerous gender transition medications and procedures. Again, oftentimes on minors, not always. Sometimes it's done on adults. But we know from recent studies that this care is, in fact, dangerous, not only physically but mentally, to many of those people who undergo it. And it's not an answer to a variety of pressures and stresses and mental health issues that a lot of people grapple with. And in some ways, it seems as if Planned Parenthood has expanded into that market as they saw their abortion numbers going down. But we know that Planned Parenthood and possibly other abortion providers are seizing on this quote-unquote market for gender-affirming care to increase their bottom line. And taxpayers should not fund procedures, whether it's abortion or so-called gender-affirming care, that are dangerous to the patients.
So then what are the next steps for pro-life advocates who are wanting to make sure that we ensure that this momentum continues and, that this is not just a 1-year pause, but this is something that can extend into the future, that this is really a lasting change? What can we do to bring about that lasting change?
There's a multi-step process that states can and should go through. They should audit their funding, because I think a lot of states might be surprised at funding that's ending up in the pockets of providers of abortion or gender-affirming care. Different types of contracts, grants, research grants. So we've been encouraging a lot of states to look at the funding, take a really close and careful look, because you might be surprised who's applying for and receiving that funding. And once you know the different streams of taxpayer funding that are flowing to these providers of abortion and gender-affirming care, then you can look at legislative or executive action solutions to cut it off. Because we know that money is fungible. Even if you put restrictions on money to say, well, this can't be used directly for abortions or this can't be used directly for gender-affirming care, whatever money comes in can offset expenditures from other streams of money, because it oftentimes ends up in one pot. So we want to make sure that they're not being indirectly or directly subsidizing these procedures or these providers. So we have to prioritize the steps that we just talked about and make the defunding our top priority going into the 2026 state legislative sessions. We also need to, I think, take a look at protecting our pregnancy centers from ongoing attacks, and also looking very carefully at the chemical abortion issue. Because even in states that have basically prohibited all or most abortions, we know that abortion drugs are still flowing into those states through different mail order providers from across the country. So we have, in overturning Roe in the Dobbs decision, we had a tremendous victory. And just this session with the Medina case at the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said that states can, in fact, say that Planned Parenthood is not a Medicaid provider and not contract with them. They have given us a wonderful opportunity to cut off taxpayer dollars, which honestly are a lifeline to many of these providers.
It's an interesting way to put it. Yeah. A lifeline to anti-life facilities. So I'm wondering, for all the people listening in our audience today, the people who are everyday Kansans, and they sometimes feel like the legal system or legislation, things like that, are slightly out of their sphere of influence. Did you learn anything from your experience with the Dobbs case that could help instruct or inspire or encourage us now?
Absolutely. Everyday Americans, everyday Kansans who prayed to end abortion, who donated to pregnancy centers, who worked for groups like Kansans for Life, had a role in overturning Roe versus Wade. Because by our actions and by our commitment, we showed the Supreme Court and the nation that Roe was not settled law, and the court should overturn it.
I truly believe every person in the pro-life movement has an important role to play. And you just have to find your niche and jump in. And
we all have a role to play, and no role is more important than any other. We each kind of have God's calling in this movement and how we interact with it. And as long as we're faithful to that calling, we're going to see great results like the Dobbs case and the defunding of Planned Parenthood.
Denise, thank you so much for coming in and joining us on today's podcast. I know that everyone has really enjoyed listening to you and hearing more about the background behind the big, beautiful bill and why it is so important and how we can continue to move that effort forward to defund Planned Parenthood and other providers of abortions.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thanks to you for listening today. Just a couple quick reminders. You can stay up to date with Kansans for Life and what we're doing a couple different ways. Go to kfl.org and sign up for our mailing list. You'll get local information about training opportunities and places we'll be visiting next. Or you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok at Kansans for Life. Also, we want to mention our friends at 7 Weeks Coffee. Did you know a baby is the size of a coffee bean at 7 weeks? Yes, that's right. If coffee is a part of your daily routine and you'd rather the power of your dollars work for the pro-life cause instead of against it, head to the website, kfl.org, and click the link at the top to try this delicious, clean coffee. They'll donate a portion of the proceeds back to support this podcast and other great work of Kansans for Life. Thanks for listening today. Pass this on. Until next time, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Stay strong. The truth will overcome. We'll see you soon.